Namaste, and I bring you greetings from the north of India at the foothills of the Himalayas. It is a great pleasure to be here with you, and I congratulate the International Federation for this opportunity to have a few minutes to be with you and to tell you about the research that has been going on in India through the years from the last century till the present time. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Yoga is an ancient science, and if we want to talk about the research in yoga, if we know that yoga goes back thousands of years, the research in yoga really began thousands and thousands of years ago with the sages of India, the ancient rishis. And what was their laboratory? Their laboratory was their own body, their own brain, and they documented their experiences both through writing and by passing them on to their disciples so that we know their experiences even today. So you have experience based on internal experiments, and external experiments are important as well. This is because we want to know what's happening in our body when we feel so wonderful when we practice yoga. And one such great sage was there in India who actually had this wonderful blend of experience and experiments. That was Swami Kuvalayananda. Swami Kuvalayananda, and you can see on the right side actual recordings which he did in the 1920s. He actually used X-rays to study what was happening in the body. He had the first yoga journal, which dates back from the 1920s till the present time, and he started the wonderful institute called Kaivalyadam, the director of which, Mr. Subodh Tiwari, is here today. It is active in research right from the 1920s till 2012, a very interesting institution on the western side of India. At that time, in the 1920s, there was research in looking at whether yoga practitioners could actually stop their heart from beating or whether they could do without air. So in Kaivalyadam, they have an airtight pit where they actually did an experiment whether a yoga practitioner, a yogi, could survive without air. And in fact, there were a lot of Indians researching this. For example, this is a very interesting study where a yogi was in a sound underground in the mud and covered with earth for 8 days, and during the 8 days his electrical activity of the heart became totally flat. On the 8th day it started reviving. So this was before the 8th day, during 8 days a flat EKG, and then revival. It was published in the American Heart Journal in 1973. The most important institution in the country, or the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, which is located in New Delhi, the capital, actually had research going on Siddhis by a professor called B.K. Anand. And at this stage, it was interesting to note that not only were there studies going on in India about abilities of yogis to stop their heart or to control their bodily functions, but sadhus and sages from India went to other countries. One such example is Swami Rama, who is known for the book Living with the Himalayan Masters. He was studied in the Meninja Foundation in the US, and they found that on the left and right side of one hand, he could change his temperature. So on one side, it would be 30 degrees. On the other side of the same hand, it would be 37 degrees. Well, Swami Rama died in 1996, but he left behind a lovely institution. That is Swami Rama Sadhaka Grama, which is located in Rishikesh, again right at the foothills of the Himalayas. And there the research is continuing even today. Now the question is, does one have to be an exceptional yogi? What about people like all of us who are not sitting in the mountains? Are there physiological changes when we practice yoga? And very fortunately, this question got answered. The great master who answered it is Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who gave transcendental meditation to the world. And he showed that by just practicing transcendental meditation for 20 minutes every day, every regular university students had massive physiological changes. And so there began a new era in yoga research, studying the effects in everyday people like all of us. Looking at the physiological effects, looking at therapy, and so on. There have been studies on asanas, kriyas, pranayamas, and various methods, which you'll see the pictures of in a few minutes. But before I show you those pictures, I'd like to mention one more project and one more institution. This is located in South India, in Bangalore, the National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences, where there was a project in the 1980s to study what happens in the brain in higher states of consciousness, which included samadhi, coma, psychedelic drugs, hypnosis, deep sleep, dream sleep, and so on. And all sorts of methods are being used in India, like studying metabolism, studying autonomic variables like the blood pressure, the cardiac output, and you can see a record here, studying the EEG or the brain waves, looking at maps, spectral analysis, which part of the brain is actually being studied, evoked potentials, which is another technique to see exactly where in the brain there are changes, whole night sleep studies, brain imaging, and brain imaging when you're doing a task. Now, this is all about physiology. What were the outcome of so many studies which are going around all over India? I would just like to mention 2 points about meditation. The 2 points are as follows. Irrespective of the type of meditation, whether it was Vipassana or some other mindfulness meditation, whether it was transcendental meditation or Brahma Kumari's Raja Yoga meditation, whichever the type, and several types have been studied across the country, what has been found is that all meditations can be described as states of alertful rest. So the whole body is resting, but the brain is very active. The second point is that those people who practice meditation have a different type of sleep compared to those who do not. They have less of light sleep, less of arousals, and less of dream sleep. They have very deep sleep. And so this is physiology. I'm moving on to therapy. When we talk about therapy, many diseases have been studied in India across the whole country. You have a list here, and it will be with the International Federation. You're welcome to see the PowerPoint list. But one condition which consistently improves with yoga is bronchial asthma. This was first shown by Dr. Nagendra and Dr. Nagratna in a very strong publication which they brought out in the British Medical Journal in 1985. They are the founders of the Swami Vivekananda University, which is represented by Dr. Manjunath here, who's the joint director of research there. And bronchial asthma is indeed a condition which consistently improves with yoga. Well, as I said, there are a whole lot of diseases, asthma to cancer, right up to tuberculosis, which I had studied while I was at the Vivekananda Institute. But I'd like to mention one more person who has worked extensively on asthma. His name is Virendra Singh, and he has invented a device called the Pink City Lung Exerciser. Pink City, because he's from the city of Jaipur, which is all the buildings look pink because of the material which is used to build them. In fact, I would strongly recommend this paper published in Lancet in 1990 to be read by everyone. It's a very strong paper on yoga. So in Patanjali Yogpeeth, we are preferring to look rather than therapy on prevention. So we have emphasized studies on obesity, and I will be presenting that later on. So these are all the references for the diseases, and you are all welcome to see them. This is the Swami Vivekananda Yoga Research Foundation. As I said, Dr. Manjunath represents it here as the Joint Director of Research. Very interesting institution, blending the East and the West, science and spirituality. The administrative block is shaped like an Om. There is an auditorium like this, which has all the facilities for audiovisual projection and everything. And in the forefront, there is a scene from the Bhagavad Gita. So blending science and spirituality. I myself have spent around 15 years there, and during the time, I did research, which I'm now going to present, which I did at SVIASA. This is where it's located, Bangalore's in South India. My focus when I was there was on rehabilitation, such as children who are mentally challenged, yoga for children who have poor vision, yoga for young people who have committed some small crime like theft and are put in a correctional facility, and yoga for older people, about which my colleague Dr. Manjunath will be talking in detail, and post-traumatic stress disorder, which I'll mention very briefly now. We did 2 studies. In about 6 years ago, there was a terrible tsunami in South Asia, which affected Indonesia, as well as the Bay of Bengal, where there is a group of islands called the Andaman Islands, and it happened on Boxing Day. So there were many people who had gone there for a holiday to celebrate Christmas, and suddenly they were faced with this shock of the tsunami. They lost their relatives, they lost people, their friends, they lost their homes, and it was a terrible sudden shock to them. 1 month later, we went there, and there were about 1,500 people living in a campsite with just 15 toilets and baths. And we found that yoga could really help them, and this, of course, also was a study which we did. It was very difficult to work with them, and but very rewarding also because they showed benefits. And this is the journal where we published it. There was quite a different type of trauma, which we also studied more recently from Patanjali Yogpeeth. In the northern state of India and Bihar, there is repeated floods. Every time the monsoon comes, the state gets flooded and people have to move away from their homes every year. So they know that the rains coming means that they will have to move out of their homes. And unlike the tsunami was a sudden event, and there was aid from all over, from the International Red Cross, from everywhere. When the monsoon floods come, there is no aid. The people just face this hopelessness. And we found that with just 10 days of yoga, the people were able to reduce their sadness, their levels of depression, and this was published in BMC Psychiatry in 2010. Another area we had looked at when I was in the Vivekananda Institute was occupational stress, because all of us in our work today, including those who are working with yoga, sometimes face stress. And the type of occupations we looked at were many, but I'm going to particularly talk about those who are professional computer users. In India, there are a large number of people who earn very well by being software engineers, but they also have extremely stressful lives. They use a computer for more than 6 hours a day. It results in pain from the wrist, carpal tunnel syndrome, pain in the elbow right up to the back, and a strain, visual strain, and of course a lot of mental stress. So first we did a survey in some of the software companies, and we found that about 23% of them were taking anti-anxiety medication just because they were so stressed all the time. And then we did a randomized control trial on 220 professional software engineers, and those who were using a computer for 6 hours or more per day. We randomized them as 2 groups, a yoga group and a control. We gave them just 45 minutes of yoga every day for 5 days in a week for 2 months. And we found multiple benefits. Their stress levels reduced, their motive performance, their ability to use the keyboard was better. They said they could do it quicker. They had less of pain, from back pain to neck pain, right up to the wrist. And even the strain on their eyes was reduced. Particularly in people who use a computer a lot, the eye becomes dry. It's called dry eye syndrome. So this reduced in them. And talking of occupational stress brings me to another important institute in India, where they particularly have looked at one section of the population who are under a lot of stress all the time. That is the military. This is the Defense Institute of Physiology and Allied Sciences in New Delhi, where they look after the health, psychological and physical of the armed forces. This is a particularly challenging task in India because the northern border is right up in the Himalayas where the oxygen is less and it's very cold. Well, all this was very adapted to. They showed that the soldiers could adapt to the cold, the less oxygen, if they practice yoga. Well, all these are many applications of yoga in physiology, in therapy, many institutes across the country. But you will be surprised to know that many villages in India, many villagers in villages in India actually did not know about yoga or did not think that yoga was for them. If some of you have visited yoga centers in India, you may have seen that large number of people there are from outside India. And in fact, whenever I have visited, many of the people would come to me because I'm also a doctor and say, I've got, say, asthma, or I've got a cough. And I would say, why don't you practice yoga every day? And they say, yoga is not for us, yoga is for the foreigners. That has changed with our organization. Our founder, Swami Ramdev, has actually taken yoga to the villages of India. He organizes camps where there are 15 to 30,000, sometimes 50,000 people, and they are telecast on a channel of our organization. This is our first building where we have around 300 patients coming for free yoga classes throughout the day and Ayurvedic consultations, around 300 patients every day, and we have 100 inpatients staying as well. This is written in Hindi. It's just to say that our center is actually committed for research. This is also the cottages where people can receive treatment. The yoga teacher training center where around 7,000 people can practice yoga at a time. Well, what type of work have we been doing there? One of the techniques which has been made popular, particularly practiced in our institution, is Kapalabhati. Literally means shining forehead. So we'd have a lot of questions. Does it really make the brain more active? Does it increase the blood supply to the brain? Are the brain functions better? We have tried to answer some of these and we have published them, and I'm going to explain them in the next few slides. So one of the questions is, does Kapalabhati really increase the blood supply to the brain? Now this is a very critical question because if the blood supply increases to the brain, then people who have high blood pressure, if they practice it, can get something like stroke. So it's a risk. So what did we find? We've used various techniques, and what we found was there is no increase in blood supply to the brain if people practice Kapalabhati at a rate less than 60 breaths per minute. Very important. Less than 60 breaths per minute. But at the same time, though the blood supply did not increase, the peripheral oxygen levels were higher. And this is the journal where we published it. The second question we said, now Kapalabhati, shining forehead, does the brain functions, do they really increase? Is a person more attentive when they practice Kapalabhati? Do they become sort of lit up? So we used simple paper and pencil tests as well as event-related potential tests. And what we found was that yes, Kapalabhati does increase attention both in simple tasks as well as using brain waves. Now, normally, if a person is more attentive, then there is a certain amount of stress. Like when you're paying attention or you're trying to write an exam, you're stressed. And we wanted to see, does Kapalabhati increase the sympathetic drive? So we studied a measure called the heart rate variability. I have seen that the International Federation journal, Sense, which is a very lovely journal, has some articles on heart rate variability. So I want to spend just 1 or 2 minutes mentioning what is heart rate variability. If we run, our heart rate should increase. And then when we sit, it should come down again. If we run again, it should increase again. So this is the flexibility that the heart should have. When we need it to increase, it should increase. When we need it to slow down, it should slow down. So the more healthy the heart is, the greater is the heart rate variability. The earlier studies had shown that Kapalabhati reduces heart rate variability, which would be bad. But we found that it does not reduce heart rate variability and published it in this journal, Biopsychosocial Medicine, in 2011. What are the other effects? For example, how else can we use Kapalabhati in our life? It can actually help us by increasing our energy expenditure, the calories we spend. Just 15 minutes of practice increase the energy expenditure by 41%. So it's a good way, possibly, of helping in obesity and weight loss. I'm going to give one more example of the ancient texts and present day results. Right uninostril breathing in Sanskrit is called Surya Anuloma Viloma. Surya means the sun, because it is believed that if you breathe through the right nostril, it is heat generating. Left uninostril breathing, on the other hand, is called Chandra, where Chandra is the moon, because it's believed to be cooling. Chandra Anuloma Viloma. And alternate nostril breathing is believed to bring about balance. In the ancient texts, it was said that when breathing through the left nostril, you should do peaceful work, like obtaining nourishment. So we should always eat when we're in a quiet mood. Eating beside the computer, that's not yoga. Right nostril breathing is associated with energizing tasks. Now, this text was written thousands of years ago, the Swara Yoga text. What have we found today? Right nostril breathing increases the oxygen consumption, increases the blood pressure, and so we can use it for the young obese maybe. Left uninostril breathing actually lowers the blood pressure, and so we can use it in conditions like hypertension, anxiety, insomnia. And what about alternate nostril breathing? It brings about balance and lowers the blood pressure. We have found this in a number of studies. The blood pressure decreases with alternate nostril breathing. And it brings about balance not just between in the blood pressure, but between the left and right halves of our brain. The left half is concerned with logic, with science, with maths. The right half of the brain is concerned with art and appreciation. Science and logic, emotions and art. And now in the last few minutes, I'm going to touch on two more areas of research in Patanjali Yogapith, both of them related to prevention of disease. One of them is actually, one of our focus areas is taking yoga to schools, because we believe that if a child starts practicing yoga as soon as possible, we can prevent disease later on. In fact, we have made a whole syllabus and textbooks for a child right from the 6th standard up to the 12th standard, so a 6-year-old child right up to the age of, say, 17. We did a study where we assessed the physical, cognitive, and emotional functions in children, 100 children, and we actually tested them, randomized them as two groups, a yoga group and a physical exercise group, 50 in each group. And we found that the physical and cognitive functions were improved in both groups. The only difference was in the emotional status, which was better in the yoga group. We particularly looked at one aspect of emotional status, that is self-esteem. Now, many children in India feel a very low self-esteem if they don't do well in school. If they do poorly in the exams, each time the results are declared, there are many suicides. And we found that self-esteem improved in the yoga group, but did not improve in the physical exercise group. And as I said, we are interested particularly in obesity, because obesity, if it is controlled, can control many diseases. So in our center, we conducted certain studies which got published in Medical Science Monitor in 2 issues in 2011. We are particularly now interested in central obesity. Some people appear thin, but the only weight they have is around their waist. And why are we worried about central obesity? Central obesity is associated with many diseases: coronary heart disease, type 2 diabetes, mellitus, hypertension, and certain cancers: breast cancer in women, prostate cancer in men. And this fat is packed deep inside, and so it's difficult to remove it. We have shown that yoga helps to reduce central obesity, but we were not happy because this was a single group study. We didn't have any matched control. So we did a subsequent study, which is just completed, and we hope to submit it now, where we actually compared yoga with walking. And what we found was that a very interesting thing. Both of them improved. Yoga and walking groups improved in the BMI, in the waist-hip ratio, but there was only one difference, and that is a chemical called leptin. Now, leptin is a very interesting chemical. Fat cells in the body produce leptin. And what does leptin do? Leptin suppresses the appetite. And many people eat more when they are depressed. That's how we published an article in Depression Research and Treatment, and that's one of the causes of obesity. In winter, when there's less to do, people may eat a little more, or when they're feeling sad, people eat a little more. So it's very much related to the psychological state. And it was interesting to note that yoga increased this natural appetite suppressant or leptin significantly, whereas walking also increased it, but not significantly. I would like to end with a message that walking is good, but yoga it may be a little bit better. Why? Because yoga is not just physical. Yoga goes beyond the physical. Yoga calms the mind, perhaps by increasing the inner resources which we have through prayer and spiritual practices, the bhakti yoga, and brings about a perfect balance within us, a state of homeostasis. So there are many ways to be physically fit, but for overall balance and well-being, spiritual, mental, and physical well-being, I'm starting from spiritual rather than from physical, yoga seems to be the only solution. Thank you very much.